Welcome to the Pastoral Perspectives Podcast. Our aim is to help Christians grow spiritually by bringing pastoral wisdom and biblical clarity to important issues of Christian faith and practice. Each episode offers a thoughtful, biblical, and pastoral take on a matter of Christian theology, church life, spiritual growth, or cultural relevance that is shaped by years of local church ministry. Pastoral Perspectives is a ministry of the pastors of Vista Bible Church in Lafayette, Colorado.
Well, hey everyone, here we are again, and here you are again for another discussion that we're going to have on the Pastoral Perspectives podcast here. Kyle, is it okay if we just get going? You okay if we just get rolling here? Just jump in?
If I say no, what are we going to do?
We're just jumping in, brother. So we're gonna deal with probably a more controversial topic than usual today.
Yeah.
We thought that it might be beneficial to others. These are things we've talked about, but that it might be beneficial to do some thinking out loud here, so to speak, on the podcast about the way that we as pastors of a local church deal with issues of politics and culture and current events and things like that in our public ministry. So this is an issue that Christians, pastors have been talking a lot about, and I think in an increasing sort of way in our day. Though, if you look historically, this is one of the major issues that the church always has to deal with. Its relationship to culture and the larger society and the state and all that kind of stuff. So,
Sure.
These aren't new issues, but certainly in our day, these discussions have ramped up among Christians. And I think if I had to track it back, to some event, it'd probably be like 2020, COVID shutdowns and all that kind of stuff, and all the government overreach and
Right.
all those things going on throughout that period. From my observation, that seems to be when these discussions really took off among not just Christians generically, but even like-minded Christians, like theologically like-minded Christians, when it comes to the doctrine of Scripture and the doctrine of salvation and big doctrines, doctrine of God, things like that. Even people that are agreeing about really, really rich theology are disagreeing when it comes to the question of how the church and how pastors in particular should respond to cultural happenings, things going on in the world. And in my opinion, these discussions are not slowing down. If anything, they just keep ramping up. And so we thought it might be good to sort of peel back the curtain a little bit, at least when it comes to how we deal with these things, share how we as pastors navigate the questions of when and how we ought to say something about current events and cultural events, and when maybe we should just keep our heads down and stick to the normal rhythm of ministry. So that's what we want to talk about. That's where we're headed. So
It's good. And I want to emphasize one thing that you said, Zach, and that's we're talking about our public ministry here, not every aspect of life as individual Christians. How do we deal with this? But
right,
as pastors, when it comes to our publicly addressing these sorts of things, how do we think about it?
That's a good point, because a lot of people think if it's important to you personally, it should be a part of your public ministry, and we don't embrace that.
Right. So that's important. Make sure we clarify that. And, there's a recent event. We want to maybe look at a recent case study to springboard our discussion here. And, it's a great example of all these things that we're talking about here. And that is back in September, on the 10th of September, Charlie Kirk was assassinated. He's a conservative Christian activist, cultural commentator, entrepreneur, and Yeah, and as everybody knows, he was shot and killed at an event on a university in Utah, and he was answering questions from students about matters of politics, culture, and spirituality. He had just shared the gospel before he was shot. So really a startling event that rocked a lot of Christians and really, really affected a lot of us.
Us included.
Oh yeah, me, absolutely. One of the reasons it was so startling was, for us, those of us, a lot of us really appreciated the way that he shared the gospel. He reached out and evangelized to young people, in our nation, in discussing important ideas with them and bringing to bear scripture on those issues with college students. So, it felt like an attack, not just on politically conservative people, but especially on like Bible believing Christians who are looking for courageous examples of people who are sharing the gospel and evangelizing the lost in our day.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, because he had become more and more evangelistic in his ministry, still political and still about, conservative politics. He was still arguing for all those things, but became much more explicitly evangelical.
Yeah.
In the last few years.
Yeah, and we're not here to get into the motives of everything, but just to say, like, that's how it kind of felt to us as Christians who could identify with him in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And those feelings, would you say they were probably exacerbated in a significant way just by the reactions of many people, left-leaning people on, various media networks, news shows, and
absolutely
also on social media, not just public personalities, but your friends and your family and things like that.
Right.
And who seem to justify the assassination in various ways as if it just wasn't that big a deal. And like we said, it disturbed us, certainly, and disturbed the two of us.
Yeah.
And that wasn't because we were devoted followers of Charlie Kirk, but because of what his, public assassination and many of the reactions to it revealed about the state of our society.
Exactly.
So, and because it was such a widely known event, such a consequential event, an event that everyone was aware of and all of that, we had to wrestle with whether we would say anything about it publicly, and if so, how we would do that. So that's why we think it's a good case study here.
Yeah. So, and it's an example of all kinds of things where we have to think through these sorts of things. Now, and for some Christians, the question on this particular issue of whether pastors should speak publicly about this terrible event in their sermons, it wasn't even a question at all, right? You've probably seen or are aware of, some people went so far to say things like, if your pastor doesn't speak about Charlie Kirk this Sunday after the event happened, then you should leave your church.
Yeah.
If they don't say his name, you should leave your church, and all those sorts of things.
Yeah.
And they would call their churches or their pastors cowards for not choosing to speak about it in the way they wanted them to.
Yeah.
Which is, I think, an important point, in the way they wanted them to. And so we can talk about why that mindset is not great and why it wasn't such a cut and dry issue to us. But for now, let's just say Christians and pastors have varying philosophies for deciding when and whether and how to speak about cultural and political matters and current events in some public fashion in their ministries.
Yeah. And we can't speak for everyone else, and that's not our intention here. We can only speak for ourselves. So that's what we wanted to do in this episode. So if you're interested in how two, ordinary kind of guys wrestle through a thing like this, maybe it'll be helpful to you, beneficial. So maybe the first thing we could do is lay out some just basic principles for engaging this, just how we sort of a general framework for that we filter these things through and how we think about them. So I think the first thing we should say is that the Bible nowhere explicitly commands or explicitly requires pastors to speak about cultural events in their public ministries, right? So no explicit commands, no explicit requirement, at least as far as we can tell. So it's interesting to me that, aside from like the Old Testament, Old Covenant prophets who would address cultural dynamics to a degree, they would address, historical events and things like that. In the New Testament with the apostles, they're not doing a lot of that at all. And I would think some of that's because the church is a different entity than Israel. That's another issue.
Yep.
But you just don't see it in New Covenant ministry. Examples of faithful New Covenant preachers and teachers and, the biblical writers, they're not doing this. They're not speaking about cultural events. They're speaking about Christ. They're speaking about the gospel. They're speaking about eternal realities. And you just don't find a lot of discussion, a lot of attention at all on these fleeting historical shifts and dynamics. So,
Right.
I think that's first. We don't see an explicit command or requirement to talk about these things publicly in our public ministries.
Yep, exactly. And the second thing I think that we would say is that the question of whether and how pastors address cultural events in their ministries is largely a matter of Christian liberty as a result of that first point, right? So there's actually a really good paragraph in our teaching confession, which comes from the Second London Confession of Faith, so this isn't just unique to us, that's really, really relevant to these discussions, and it's something that we heartily agree with. So I'll just read this. It says, God alone is Lord of the conscience, and he has left it free from human doctrines and commandments that are in any way contrary to his word or not contained in it. So,
really
believing, and it continues, so believing such doctrines or obeying such commands out of conscience is a betrayal of true liberty of conscience. Requiring blind obedience destroys liberty of conscience and reason as well.
Mm-hmm.
So, if you want to boil that down, what that means very simply is that if God has not commanded something, that Christians are free to do it or not to do it according to the dictates of their own consciences. And so, and if you're someone that judges another person as being in sin simply because they approach a particular issue differently than you do, then, you're trying to bind someone where God has given them freedom.
Yeah. A great passage to go to that talks about these things explicitly, not this question explicitly, but Christian liberty of conscience, those kind of things, is Romans 14. Such a great passage to go to, where in the Roman Church, first century Roman Church, you got Jews and Gentiles, and you just have everybody from all walks of life, old and young, and men and women, just everybody, rich and poor, slave free, all these people. They're all in this one church in this, thriving metropolis, which is Rome, and they've got all kinds of differences and like really deeply held convictions and personal preferences and all of that. And it seems like they're struggling to, they're judging each other, and they're kind of fighting about those things. And it's always been very interesting to me that when Paul comes in and is, he's sort of playing referee in Romans 14, he doesn't say who's right and who's wrong, really. Like there's some implication where he lands.
Yep.
But he doesn't say this group's right, you guys all need to think like them. This group's wrong, all you people need to change your minds. He doesn't do that. He says, don't judge each other, accept one another. He says you're not going to stand before men, at the judgment. You're going to stand before God. God, as the confession says, is the Lord of the conscience. God is. And so it's better, even, I think the implication in that case is it's better to do the wrong thing because you're sincerely trying to obey God than to do the right thing just because you're pressured into doing it or whatever.
Yep.
Christian liberty is a wonderful, wonderful thing in the church. It really cultivates the expression and practice of grace in the church. We
Yep.
don't have to agree about everything. We don't have to, be like-minded about everything. We have to be like-minded about Christ. We have to be like-minded about the gospel. But we're going to have all kinds of differences, and that's okay. And we should bear with one another.
That's right.
In those things. So I think we would say, at least generally speaking, that when it comes to this issue, when it comes to addressing specific big cultural happenings in a pastor's public ministry, that he should simply approach the issue prayerfully before God, do it with his Bible open, make sure he's being informed by the scriptures as much as possible, and then he should proceed according to his own conscience. And then once you've done that, don't judge, your fellow Christians and fellow pastors for taking a different course.
Right.
So I think that also probably tells you what we think about people who would say, if your pastor didn't talk about Charlie Kirk on Sunday or whatever it may be, whatever the given Sunday is, then you should leave your church. I think this probably tells you what we think.
Yep.
Think of that, right?
Right.
We see it as a direct violation of Christian liberty.
Yep.
Christian liberty is a great, great thing.
That's right.
I want to preserve it.
Very important. A third thing that, is an important point to make is that God does command pastors to do very specific things in and with their public ministries.
Right.
And so those are non-negotiables,
Yeah.
right? So not everything a pastor does is a matter of Christian liberty. Some things are required of him. So those things are things like proclaiming Christ from the Bible, expounding the meaning of Scripture publicly, shepherding the people that God has entrusted to them. And by that, it's important to understand we're talking about a specific group of people, not some nebulous internet audience,
Yep.
Full of people they don't know, and as pastors haven't committed to this in the same local church. Other things, we're commanded to give spiritual oversight and protection to the members of that church, to protect from false teaching, false teachers. We are commanded to pray, to prayer and the ministry of the word. When the apostles summarize their ministry, that's what they say. Two of those two things, prayer and the ministry of the word. And then also evangelizing the lost by preaching the gospel to the church. So those are the non-negotiable responsibilities of pastors.
Yeah. And so rather than saying, if your pastor doesn't speak about whatever the big cultural event is, then you should leave your church, and then post a video of yourself on Instagram walking out of your church, as I watched on the gram the Sunday after the Charlie Kirk shooting. People literally walking out of their church. One guy was like, I've been at this church for 15 years, and he didn't mention Charlie Kirk, and so I'm out. Instead of doing that, maybe you could say, if your pastor doesn't do all these things that Kyle just walked through, if he doesn't open the Bible, if he doesn't preach Christ, if he doesn't, warn people about sin and the danger of sin, doesn't say anything about the promises of God or heaven and hell, or encourage people with the truth, or correct theological error, or build up the saints with the truth of Jesus, and invite non-Christians to believe in him. If your pastor doesn't do that, and he doesn't do it consistently, okay, then maybe you can start thinking about whether that church is for you. Even then, we'd say, don't just walk out, on a Sunday. Go talk to him and talk about your concerns first, and proceed very prayerfully, and maybe even consider whether you're just being judgmental, being too critical yourself. So, if he doesn't do those non-negotiable things, okay, then that's a big deal, because those things aren't matters of Christian liberty. The things that are, even if you feel really strongly about them, you are not the Lord of someone's conscience. God is. So you need to live like that.
Right.
And these are these things that Kyle just read, talked through. Those are the things that weigh most heavily on us. If you want to know what we're burdened with, it's those things. We want to do the things that God commanded us to do. And while I think you can do those things and speak about culture at the same time, there's a way to preach Christ and address the happenings, and the stuff going on in the world. You can also focus on cultural commentary in a way that you overshadow and do harm to these other things that God has commanded, and you can lose sight of what's most important. So,
and I think once again, it's appropriate to again remind everybody we're talking about the public ministry. Like when we say we're burdened with these things, it's not that these events, these cultural events, don't burden us as men and as Christians and as believers. We are, again, discussing the public ministry, like the worship service, things like that. All right. Now, this is also important. The fourth thing we would say is that sermons are not the only opportunity that pastors have to address cultural issues in their churches. They're not, and I don't think they should be. So even if you decide it would be good for you as a pastor to say something about a particular cultural issue to your church publicly, the reality is, and I think many people lose sight of this reality, that a Sunday morning sermon it's not. And it maybe at least it shouldn't be the only way that you can do so. So you could write about those issues. You can write a letter.
That's what I opted to do. Right?
That's what you did.
That's what I did with the Charlie Kirk assassination.
So that's how we handled, and we did address it on some level publicly, but we did it by reminding people that we're here to worship God.
Purpose.
We don't want to be distracted by all the mayhem and the chaos of the world. We get plenty of that out there. When we come together, it's to behold the glory of Christ. But anyways, I can digress from that. You could have a podcast discussion about them.
Really?
I mean,
that's a good idea.
That's just like, where'd I come up with that?
We should do that.
You can talk to people like one-on-one personally, and you should. You could take a class, a Sunday school class, or you could have an evening event where everybody comes to talk about a particular thing.
Yeah.
There's all kinds of other ways to talk about these things publicly besides a sermon.
Yep.
Right?
Yep. Just because an issue is important doesn't mean it needs to be the focus of your sermon on Sunday or your worship service on Sunday.
Yeah.
You can regard it as important and help the church think and respond to it without letting it sort of hijack your whole church or the sermon or the worship service or whatever. Okay, so when might it be beneficial for pastors to address cultural issues? So we're not saying it's wrong to do so. We're not saying you have to do so.
Yep.
We see there much freedom there for pastors to determine according to the needs of their own local church and their own particular context whether to do it or not do it. So for us, when might we do it? What would it take for us to address some cultural event or happening or something publicly in our ministries? What is our grid?
Well, I think there's a few principles there. The first one, I think, being the most important is like when it's an issue that directly affects your congregation, your people, your church in a significant way. And like the most obvious example is COVID, right? That affected everyone in our church in a lot of ways. It required that we address it. But it takes discernment to know when this is the case, because even in a church our size, it's not a massive church, but you have people like severely affected by, again, just use Charlie Kirk as the example, and you have people who didn't even know who he was.
Yep. And
some people who maybe you've heard of him once, but don't quite understand what the big deal is. So it does take some discernment and some evaluation and things like that. Yeah. There's liberty.
Definitely. Then a second principle that we or a second instance where we think it might be beneficial is when doing so gives us a chance to apply a central truth of the Bible to the thinking of our congregation in a personal way. It just provides a personal, memorable case study to apply a real core truth of Scripture. So like, in my sermon, I don't remember exactly what I said the Sunday after Charlie Kirk's assassination. I know I alluded to it, at least in the sermon, as an example of how only Jesus can fix our world.
Mm-hmm.
People long for that. They want the world to be fixed. They want justice. They want wrongs to be righted. They want all to be made well. And our political activism and our social efforts and our, all of our work in society ultimately isn't gonna fix this place. Only Jesus can. So that was an opportunity for us to remember, a core truth of Scripture. And so it seemed appropriate to at least allude to what had happened for that reason.
Yep. Yeah, and maybe a third thing we would say about this is when the Bible gives direct instruction to Christians regarding how to think and how to respond to a particular cultural event or dynamic, then it makes sense for us and beneficial. It would be beneficial for us to address a cultural issue.
Mm-hmm.
But even with all these principles, again, there's that Christian liberty that it's not a requirement.
And it still doesn't mean you have to focus on it in the worship service or in a sermon. So
Right.
trying to put all these things together. All right, let's run through just quickly some bad reasons for speaking about cultural issues publicly. What would be some bad reasons to do it?
Well, let's see. Because so-and-so wants me to. Or this group of people over here wants me to.
Because this social media mob is insisting that I should.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah.
So, in other words, if we're going to fear man and not God, and we're going to make our decision based on the whims of men and not what we see God calling us to.
That's a bad reason.
It's a bad reason. What else?
Well, how about because other churches are doing it?
Yeah.
That is a bad reason for giving focus on those things in your public ministry just because others are doing it. That was it. If I go back to COVID, I don't want to stir up some PTSD here, but that was a big thing because there were some churches saying you gotta take a stand and you gotta be publicly saying things about this and publicly preaching to your governor and all this kind of stuff, and it really kind of caught on. There was sort of a wave there for a while of this was becoming the focus of most worship services, and we had to weigh that. We had to wrestle with that. But just because another church, even a church we respect, is doing it, is not a good reason for us to do it.
Sure.
So that's a bad reason. Go ahead.
I'll give you one. Because the world is talking about this issue a lot right now. Therefore, we should.
Yep.
That's not a good reason.
Terrible reason. There's one thing the world is not talking about, and that's Jesus.
Right.
So maybe the church should be the place where people talk about Jesus. That's my take. All right. Also, because you're trying to attract people who are interested in the issue, that's a bad reason. That's just a different kind of seeker-sensitive philosophy.
Yeah.
Just trying to draw people in. So, that's what people want to hear about. So that's what you need to talk about. Or the other side is you're afraid of losing people for not talking about it. It all goes back to the fearing God or fearing man question.
Yep.
Right? If someone in our church, thankfully, I don't think there were any, but if there were any that said, we're going to leave if you don't, make this a big deal on a Sunday, we'd have to be content with letting them walk,
Right.
Because we fear the Lord and want to do what's right by him. News outlets covering it, that's a bad reason. Bad reason. These are all terrible reasons.
Okay, well, I think another thing we should look at here and talk about is what are some potential dangers that accompany speaking about cultural issues publicly? Like what sort of things are we also weighing in terms of the dangers and the...
These weigh on us heavily.
Yeah.
Really.
Right.
There's the danger of overshadowing Christ, overshadowing the gospel, sort of moving to the periphery of our church, things that should be central, and moving things that should be on the outskirts to the center.
Right.
We don't want to do that. That's a real danger, and that's historically that's a major danger that many churches have succumbed to.
It's one of the things we are always wanting to guard against in our church. It's a slippery slope, and we don't want to drift off of why our church is here, because of Christ and the gospel.
I think people sometimes don't understand how many things you have to say no to in order to stay focused on the main things. There's a lot of important things out there that we just can't make, give a lot of emphasis to in here, in the church. Because if we do, then, there's always a choice that you have to make. What's most important? And some things get sacrificed inevitably. Important things will get sacrificed at any given moment on any given Sunday. There's a lot of things we can't focus on. Mm-hmm. So if you bring too many of those outside things in, pretty soon you lose what's central.
Yep. Well, and then I think another danger is that it can run the risk of violating the purpose of corporate worship, which is another huge burden that we have of not wanting to do that. So the focus of corporate worship is God and his glory. Mm-hmm. We gather to declare his excellencies, to proclaim his greatness, to sing his praises, to sit humbly under his word, to observe the ordinances in a worshipful way. Those things, again, that we are commanded to do. And we are very sensitive to not wanting to violate that purpose and to make it something else, make it about something else.
Yeah. And we talked about this in a previous episode, right? The purpose of corporate worship. And should go back to that if you need a reminder. But the meeting of the church is not a political pep rally. It's not a cultural, whatever, lament session. Or we're here to focus on God and his glory. And as pastors, it's our responsibility to make sure that we're doing that as much as possible.
Right.
I think a third danger is when you bring these things into the church too often, too repetitively, too emphatically, you run the risk of unifying the church around those things and not the gospel and not Christ and his word. And that's a very real danger. There's
Absolutely.
Churches that are unified, but not around Jesus.
That's right.
And we want to be unified around him.
That's right.
And not around our particular thoughts about cultural events.
That's right. Very, very important. And then similarly, like another danger is aligning the church with the values of a particular culture or political group, rather than with the values of God's kingdom. Mm-hmm. Maybe there's some overlap between the two things, but we don't want to create confusion there, and we don't want to align our church with politics, culture.
Yeah.
We want to align with Christ, with God's word, and we know we won't go wrong that way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so maybe to land this plane here, just kind of summarize things.
This is more of a turbulent plane than a lot of our other episodes. Like this,
yeah,
a little bit of a harder one to do.
Have we gotten past the clouds yet? As we think about our responsibility as pastors when it comes to addressing cultural issues in our public ministries, we think we have freedom to do it. We also don't believe that we're necessarily commanded to do it, and certainly not commanded to do it in every case. And that's something we didn't talk about. Just the slippery slope. Where do you draw the line? What meets the criteria and what doesn't? There's a lot of very important things going on in the world.
Oh yeah.
So what do we talk about and what don't we talk about? You have to have a grid, or else you either you'll talk about everything, in which case
You still won't talk
you
about
still
everything.
won't talk about everything. So we don't think we're commanded to do so necessarily, and so that what that means is that when we do it, we want to do it for the right reasons, and if we decide to do it, it doesn't necessarily mean we're going to hijack our sermons and our Sunday worship service to do it, and likely won't. So that, in a nutshell, is how we think about things like this, and hopefully that's helpful to someone, and if not, maybe it can just hold us accountable in the future. We can go back and listen to what we said about these things.
I also think a part of landing this plane, we really do want to say, if you ever want to know about what we think about a particular issue as believers and as people who know the Bible and want to honor God in our lives, just like you do, just come talk to us. It's not that we don't want to talk about these things, that we don't have opinions about these things, and that they're not having an effect on us. We would love to talk about these things. And some people did about in the most recent thing with the Charlie Kirk thing. Some people came and talked, and
I really appreciate
good.
It.
Yeah, good discussions. We're thinking about these things too. We're happy to talk about them, and just hope you understand now a little bit better why we address or don't address things in our public worship services.
It's not because we're not paying attention. It's because we're trying to be very deliberate about what we do.
Yep.
All right. Well, that's probably enough for today, you think?
Suppose so.
I think it has to be. So thanks everybody for listening. Hope you have a great rest of your day.